To cover up the continuing losses, Pat Finn was now faxing falsified financial reports to the board of directors and to David Shapira every week. But in November of 1990, a secretary mistakenly faxed a report with the real numbers to Shapira. Here in black and white was a report which no CEO could ignore. When he saw these startling numbers, Shapira summoned Pat Finn to his Pittsburgh offices.
Pat Finn told David Shapira that, you know, everything, those are just preliminary numbers. We have to make some adjustments to them, and once we make the adjustments to them, then they'll be okay.
In the end, the CEO of Phar Mor failed to check the figures independently. He seems to have bought Pat Finn's excuse.
Now remember, we're 3 years into the fraud. Is CEO David Shapira really as gullible as he seems? Well, a cynic might say that considering Shapira's huge personal stake as a major shareholder in Phar Mor, he believed Finn because he wanted to. After all, he'd put his money on Mickey Modus, just like Pat Finn, the people of Youngstown, the banks, vendors, and investors. But what none of them knew was just how bad a bet they'd made.
The deficits continued to grow, and knowledge of the fraud was now about to extend to another member of the company. Stan Cherylstein joined Phar Mor in 1990. He quickly rose to the position of controller, a job that placed him in charge of all cash disbursements.
Well, I learned about the fraud almost 2 years after my joining the company. That's when John Anderson took me into his office and closed the door and told me that, well, you're the controller for Phar Mor now, and you should be aware of this situation. And he pulled out a subledger schedule and told me basically that the financial statements at the end of June 1991 were misstated by approximately $150 million.
If anybody was likely to blow the whistle, it would seem to have been the newcomer, Stan Cherylstein. But he didn't. He, too, was persuaded to toe the line.
I felt that through exclusivity money, through perhaps raising the prices, I felt that there were some options at that point that Pat and Mickey had available to them to correct the situation. And that's why I stayed on with the company, and that's why I never told another soul. That coupled with a fear that I believe I had at the time, that maybe if I did go over their heads, maybe some harm could come to myself.
Physical harm?
Physical harm.
John Anderson had spent much of his 4-year career inside the fraud. Cherylstein was the closest thing he'd found to a moral compass.
He was able to make a lot of sense of things and, you know, seemed to give opinions and seemed to say that, no, this is not the way it should be. We should be doing things this way, or no, that is absolutely wrong. And he was in there actually trying to fight and trying to change things, and but just was up against a brick wall.
Hiding the fraud was becoming more and more of a problem. The company was frequently strapped for day-to-day cash. Bills went unpaid for months.
We had cabinets stuffed with held checks at the company that had been generated out of the accounts payable system, but we couldn't mail them because if we mailed them, the checks would have bounced. So they kept accumulating and accumulating.
By the spring of 1991, Phar Mor was holding back $155 million it owed to vendors. They retaliated by halting shipments to some stores. Shoppers began to notice an unusual sight: empty shelves, an image at odds with Phar Mor TV ads, which promised customers everything.
That's power buying.
Phar Mor continued to live in its dream world, even though CEO and board member David Shapira knew about most of the held checks.
Discover how Phar Mor's power buying gives you far more buying power.
So what was more important to Shapira and the directors than pressing for explanations? Perhaps selling Phar Mor's stock. The prestigious New York investment firm Corporate Partners makes large investments on behalf of state and corporate pension funds. Phar Mor had caught their eye because if it kept growing, it would be a great candidate for selling its shares on the New York Stock Exchange.
The company was growing and had hoped to go public at some point, and by having a reputable investment firm make a sizable investment would give a lot of credibility to the company and its stock for a future public offering.
The stakes were substantial. Once Phar Mor went public, Monis, Shapiro, Finn, and everyone else with a piece of the company figured to realize the entrepreneurial dream, cashing in big time. Corporate partners wanted to invest $200 million. But first, quite naturally, they would send in their own accountants to check the books. Charity Imbrie, Phar Mor's legal counsel, had been asked to watch over Monis by Phar Mor's CEO, David Shapiro, afraid Monis might jeopardize the corporate partners deal. But in the process, Imbrie picked up some alarming scuttlebutt. A Phar Mor vice president told her that some vendors were refusing to supply stores because bills were going unpaid. Imbrie documented her concerns in a confidential memo to David Shapiro, covering everything from disgruntled vendors to cash flow problems. What did the CEO do? He told her to rip it up. Imbrie chose to keep one copy anyway, and at the bottom she noted what Shapiro had said. That, quote, he was aware of most of the items listed in this memo, and that, quote, it was particularly important to rip it up now because of pending financing stock sale with CP, that is, corporate partners. If they went ahead with their stock purchase, corporate partners would own 17% of Phar Mor. David Shapiro stood to make more than $2 million on the deal, Mickey Monis an even million. Shielded from the rumors, corporate partners saw only Phar Mor's commanding role at the convention, and they were suitably impressed.
I think what they saw was what everybody else saw on the outside, this company with this unique buying philosophy and buying ability and low prices and rapid growth coming from nowhere to $3 billion in sales in record time, and the mystique that it was taking over the deep discount world, and they were going to end up on top of the whole heap by the time it was done.
4 weeks later, corporate partners announced their $200 million investment in Phar Mor. The official story was that this would give Phar Mor the much-needed cash to continue its aggressive growth plans. But there were more pressing needs for the money than growth, or even covering the fraud. Much of it had to go first towards paying off angry vendors.
Had corporate partners known that their money was going to be used to pay Revlon and Procter & Gamble and Helene Curtis invoices from 3-4 months ago, I don't think they ever would have invested in the company.
But they didn't know, nor did anyone else. Phar Mor was now in the hole by $145 million. But Pat Finn was becoming more and more anxious. According to Finn, Monis had now distanced himself from managing the fraud, which required more attention than ever. And Finn was stuck with the responsibility of designing new ways to cover it up.
My energy and people who work for me was going to cover up a situation, and it really wasn't going towards making Phar Mor a better company. And that really hurt. And I think we all long for the day that we could just kiss this goodbye and just dedicate ourselves to making the company better.
But if Finn still harbored some hope, Cherylstein and Anderson had lost the last shred of faith.
John and I continually talked about the fraud and what we were going to do to resolve it. We had these discussions probably every day for lunch. And Pat was aware that we were talking about it all the time. And he knew that we were nervous. And it was those concerns that we brought to Pat's attention that really forced the April meeting.
Finn now went to Monis and told him the junior executives were threatening to quit if something wasn't done to address the problem. A meeting was set for a Saturday morning in April of '92. Cherylstein was especially worried that if the fraud were discovered, Monis could lay blame on the accounting department.
So I went into the April meeting knowing that I didn't want the situation blamed on me, because I had just arrived 6 months earlier. So I decided to tape it.
We're getting real close to audit time here.
Right.
and we got some major problems out there.
Right.
And, you know, we're talking about how to cover it next year.
Yeah.
That assumes we get through an audit. And, you know, I'm on the front line out there
I know that.
with these auditors, and if something comes out the light, I'm there first, and I got to sit there and try and cover this stuff. And,
Something comes out, you're going to have to get the pass.
but the numbers are just,
Well, they get,
problems are multiplying and the numbers are multiplying.
yeah, try to get through the audit. We don't know what else to tell you, and that's what we got to do. I mean, we're in a good spot here, obviously. Keep our fingers crossed and get through it and get the number down.
Leaving that meeting, you know, there was a very discouraging feeling, a sense of almost that, you know, whatever the guy's saying probably is not going to happen.
Mickey's personality is in essence, he's a gambler. If he loses a bet, he's going to double up on the bet to hopefully the next time he can recover.